Some of the people photos I've loved most never really felt like portraits in the traditional sense. They felt like something else, more alive, not stiff, not posed, not fake, like this, more real. And for years, I couldn't fully explain why, until I realized something. The moment that you ask someone to stand there for a portrait, the person who you wanted to photograph disappears. I photograph regular people, not models, not people who are used to cameras, and often I only have a short window. That's the reality of travel photography. You usually only get one moment. Sure, if you spend hours or days with someone, they're likely to eventually relax in front of the camera. However, most of the time in travel photography, you don't have that luxury. That's just the reality that we're working with. And often you see someone with a really incredible face, with a really strong presence, and you think to yourself, this could be amazing. But the very second that the camera is pointed at them, everything changes. They tense up, they perform, or they smile, but in that automatic way that people smile when they feel like they have to smile. And suddenly whatever felt special about them is gone. Later on in the video, I'll show you a few real examples where this didn't happen and how you can start getting those kinds of portraits too. But first, we need to understand why people change the moment that a camera is pointed at them. I started to learn why people stop being themselves in front of the camera through countless bad images during my early journeys around India. India has some of the most photogenic faces in the world. So many incredible characters. Because of that, I did manage to make some of those more formal, looking into the camera portraits. There were simply too many opportunities not to manage that. And on very rare occasions, there was something in that awkwardness of the poses. But what you don't see are all the failures. All the times that someone locked up, stood there like a soldier, or just looked really nervous and out of place. What I eventually understood, almost by accident, was that this wasn't happening because of the people that I was photographing. Because for most people around the world, standing still while being looked at through the camera is unnatural. It's very unnatural. So when we, as photographers, force that situation, people change. They start performing for the camera, often without even fully realizing it. And so the camera no longer simply records what's there. For most people, it changes the way that they behave. Sometimes it's an exaggerated show of confidence. In Brazil, where I am now, it's often this. The thumbs up. And very often, it's a smile. And a genuine smile can be powerful. It's a great visual cue for joy. When we get that, it's gold. But the problem is, most of those smiles aren't real. I never ask people to smile. If they happen to smile because of something real, then that's great, I'm gonna try to capture that. But a smile because the camera is there, that takes the authenticity out of it for me. Having said all of that, occasionally you do meet someone who's a natural. You can point the camera right in their face and they carry themselves as if the camera is not there at all. And when that happens, you gotta make the most of it. But those are rare exceptions. Most of the time, to get people to be natural in front of the camera is a real tough challenge, and the more you try to direct them or to guide them, the worse it usually gets. So this was something that frustrated me endlessly. I kept running into the same problem over and over again, no matter where I traveled. But after throwing away so many of those photos, I started to notice something. When people forgot about the camera, even for a moment, something would happen. I'd already seen hints of this in India, when my friend and translator Hardik would start talking to people and when he'd distract them from the whole photographic process. Their masks would drop, they'd stop performing, they'd become themselves again. And suddenly I would start seeing visual cues in their body language, their expressions, their gaze. These visual cues would say something real about who they are. And I remember thinking, yep, that's the person I wanted to photograph. But this still didn't fully click for at least a few more years. I kind of continued to blame the circumstances, not enough time, not enough access, or I would just accept that perhaps some people are never going to be natural in front of the camera. So eventually I did realize that the real problem was the situation that I was creating. And you know what it was? I was turning the portrait session into a really big deal for the person in front of the camera, even though I didn't really mean to do that. And when I started traveling to places where I could talk to people myself, that's when I began seeing the big difference. In those situations, the camera stopped being the main thing. We'd just be talking, and I'd make photos while the conversation continued, or while the person in front of the camera just kept doing whatever they were doing. And if someone would try to do the whole freeze for a portrait, I'd tell them, no, just keep going. And that way, whatever made me want to take the photograph of that person in the first place was still there. Their expressions, their body language, something real. Those photos just felt right. The visual cues were there and they would come together into an image that evoked a sense of story, or something that you could feel. What still surprises me is how rarely anyone ever talks about this. When I think about the photographers that I admire, David Alan Harvey, William Albert Allard, Steve McCurry, Alex Webb, many of their portraits never really felt like portraits in the traditional sense. They felt like real moments where the presence of the person was very strong and the photographer just happened to be there to make the photo. With me, with time, after my own experiments and after studying the work of these masters, I got another important insight. And you know what my first realization was? Before anything else, you simply need to interfere less. Instead of trying to make a portrait happen, you create a situation. A situation where the person is at ease, where the camera isn't the main thing. This often means photographing people when they're doing something, in between sentences, as they laugh, while they're interacting. And even with a portrait that looks more formal, like this photo here, the man looking straight into the camera, it still feels like a frame made right after something happened. That's exactly why it works. After a certain point, it became clear. You create the situation, and then you step back enough for something real to appear. When you get that balance right, the chances of making something truly special go way up. And here's the other thing. This approach doesn't just help people feel more at ease in front of the camera. Their actions, their interaction, the genuine expressions, the work they're doing, all of these become important visual cues. If you've been paying attention, you would have heard me mention visual cues a few times already. Visual cues are the elements in a photo that represent more than what they literally show. They give an image context. They reveal what kind of a situation a person is in, and suddenly a photograph makes sense without needing any explanation. In fact, most of my photography is built around this idea of visual cues. It's something that I go into much more deeply in my visual cues program, but the basic principle is quite simple and you're already getting the idea behind it. These days, I actively avoid static posed portraits. Not because they're inherently bad, but because the really strong ones are rare. And because for most people, being directed for a photo pushes them out of their comfort zone. This grandfather and grandchild, I actually asked my guide to direct them to sit in that spot and to look into the distance. And some people would be perfectly happy with a photo like this. In fact, you see images like it all over social media. But for me, and probably for you if you're after something deeper, this photo is just okay-ish. Because they're not actors or models, and being directed like that pulls them out of their comfort zone, they start to kind of act, and just like any mediocre acting, the result becomes predictable and emotionally flat. However, creating those real emotional moments is not always straightforward. There is something important that you need to understand. If you don't speak the language, it's pretty hard to help people forget about the camera. Unless you have guides, translators, or local friends. And getting help from them is absolutely fine. Sometimes you can't avoid it. I used to do it all the time. But there is a catch. And this is the part that most people aren't prepared for. They think that everything will just work out. Let me share a quick story. Years ago, I was traveling in the mountains in the Philippines. I hired a local guide to help me explore the rice terraces. We would meet people along the way and I would want to make photographs. The problem was the guide was a little too enthusiastic. He meant well and he wanted to show how helpful he was. But the second that I would show interest in someone, he would jump in and he'd go, "Stand here, smile, look this way." And just like that, they were yanked out of their comfort zone and the moment was gone. After a few interactions like that, I realized that there was absolutely no way that I'd get anything real. So I didn't bother with the photos altogether. Here's a part that really matters and you can't assume that it'll just work out. When you work with a guide or a translator, they have to be on the same page as you. You have to talk to them, explain what you're trying to do, what you're looking for, and make sure that they actually understand, not just nodding along. Otherwise, they don't help. They become an obstacle, another layer between you and the person that you're trying to photograph. So when you speak the language, it's incredibly freeing. Just you and the person in front of you. You create the situation yourself, and you find the right balance between engaging and stepping back enough to give space for something real to happen. But of course, you won't always speak the language. On many of my journeys, I didn't speak the language. I always try to learn a few basic words, but often it'd be nothing more than that. And in those situations, the right guide or translator was absolutely everything. They were the difference between frustration and some of my favorite photos. Ideally, this is what you want from your guide or translator. They're good at small talk. Sometimes they'll explain that you're trying to make natural photos. Other times they simply let things flow and create a situation where the person feels at ease. Their job is to take care of the human interaction so that you can be a fly on the wall and quietly make the photograph. It's not to take control of the scene and start directing it like that guy in the Philippines. When a guide understands this, that's when something special can happen. You become almost invisible. People forget about the camera. They stop performing, and those genuine moments start to appear. I'm not afraid to admit it, but some of the guides and translators that I worked with, they were kind of like a secret weapon behind my photographs. Without them, I wouldn't have had much of a chance in many situations. Earlier in the video, I mentioned that I would show you a few real-life examples. I'll walk you through how these photos actually happened, and that should help you see how you can apply these ideas yourself. This wrestler, he was resting between bouts during training. I noticed a corner of the training pit where the light created this dramatic chiaroscuro effect. Before he even reacted to the camera, I quickly made the photo. His focused, unaware gaze became a clear visual cue for concentration. The sweat beads for exhaustion. I photographed other wrestlers in the same spot afterwards. But they were aware of me, and so none of those images had quite the same realness about them. This photo was made purely thanks to my friend and guide Hardik. He's incredible at small talk and putting people at ease. While he was talking with her, I could simply observe and wait for the right moment. The cultural visual cues were already there, her clothing, the jewelry, the bracelets, and when the genuine smile appeared, he actually made her laugh. It became the emotional visual cue that brought the portrait to life. Another great guide I worked with was my friend Zememphis in Ethiopia. At first, this girl was very shy and a bit awkward. She almost wanted to run away because she was so shy. But there was something beautiful and real in that shyness. As Zememphis kept talking to her, she became even more shy and covered her face. And that gesture became the visual cue, a very genuine expression of her personality. These photos were made during a visit to Belarus. the country where I was born. People would invite me into their homes, would talk, drink tea, and I'd photograph them during the moments in between. Expressions like this pensive look or a smile, they become visual cues to a person's inner world. And when they interact with the objects around them, when we see their surroundings, a quiet sense of story appears. This man had been plowing his field when we started talking. I spoke a little Indonesian back in the day, and my friend joined in the conversation, all in Indonesian. At one point I stepped closer and I kind of fell into the wet, muddy ground that he was working, and he thought it was pretty hilarious. So when I raised the camera, he couldn't hold back that big smile. And again, a genuine smile is a powerful visual cue. It instantly engages us emotionally in a very real way. So hopefully these photos gave you a clearer idea of how these kinds of photos happen. And I also hope that perhaps you got a few ideas on how you can approach making these kinds of images too. You've probably noticed that I kept mentioning visual cues again and again. That's because I'm always looking for them. Because a skillful use of visual cues adds that extra layer to a photograph, the sense of story and emotion. And again, if you want to explore the idea further, I go into it much more deeply in my visual cues program. Now, I need to be very clear about something. None of the stuff that I've talked about here guarantees a perfect portrait. It doesn't for me either. What it does is it greatly improves the odds, and that matters a lot, especially when moments are fleeting, and especially when you only get one real chance. But here's something very important. Even with all of this, there is something that separates the good results from consistently strong ones. Interestingly, it's surprisingly controversial. A lot of people resist it, and yet it's the most reliable way that I know to consistently make powerful photos of people. If you want to understand what I mean, watch this next video.